Good evening. We want to welcome our viewers of the Johnson City Government Information Channel on Charter Cable Channel 192 and Comcast Cable Channel 17 to this live telecast of the May 14, 2019 Johnson City Regional Planning Commission meeting. This meeting will be rebroadcast on Friday, May 17, 2019 at 12 p.m. Go ahead and call the meeting to order. And the first order of business will be our invocation and pledges, and since our Vice Chairman is out today, I will do that for us. Let's start with a prayer. Lord God, we thank you for a night where we can come together and do the business of this city. We ask for your help, your presence here tonight to give us hearts and minds of fairness towards our whole city, that we are glorifying you in our responses and our actions. That you may be pleased with the work that we do here, that it may benefit our community greatly. And we lift this prayer up in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
We'll rise for pledges. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Next item up on the agenda will be approval of the agenda or amendments to it.
We have a change to the agenda. We need to defer item 4 under new business until the next meeting.
We have a movement to approve the agenda with deferral of item number 4, which is a consideration of annexation of property at 3201 McKinley Road. We have a second?
I second that.
A second? All in favor?
Aye.
All. Agenda approved with the deferment of item number 4. Next will be, item up will be approval of the minutes for our meeting of last month, dated April 9. Okay.
I'd like to make just a request for just grammatical change. Throughout here, we have a statement where we say public hearing was open, seeing no one wished to speak, public hearing was closed. Can we add the word "the" to that, so it, on each one of those, please?
Fantastic. Moving forward, we have a second motion and a second with the amendment to the motion being the aforementioned editing with the word "the" inserted. All in favor?
Aye.
And therefore, that approval does carry. We have no old business to cover tonight, so we'll be launching right into new business. The first item up, therefore, will be consideration of a release of a $5,000 bond for Greenwood PUD. Mr. Renaud.
Chairman, Planning Commissioners, in January, the Planning Commission approved the final subdivision for the Greenwood PUD, and that was subject to the developer posting a $5,000 bond for stormwater management purposes. He did post that bond and had a final plat recorded, requested that the bond be released. The engineering division inspected the site and determined that all improvements have been made for which the bond was posted. Staff recommends that this bond be released in its entirety.
Thank you. Any questions for staff? I don't think we need any public hearing on the release of the bond, so.
Motion to approve the release of the bond.
A motion approved from Commissioner Marciani, and a second. And if you'll please call the roll.
Commissioner Harrell.
Yes.
Commissioner Hickson.
Yes.
Commissioner Lowe.
Yes.
Commissioner Marcioni.
Yes.
Commissioner Wild.
Yes.
Commissioner Williamson.
Yes.
Chairman Zions.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Thank you. Next item up on the agenda will be consideration or consider annexation, Hawk Landing subdivision. Mr. Bernard.
Chairman, Commissioners, before you is a request to consider the annexation of portions of 2 parcels into the city limits of the corporate limits of Johnson City. These two parcels are at the end of Municipal's Hills Drive. The Municipal's Hills subdivision, both phases are already inside the city limits. This is the parcel in its entirety. However, it is only this hatch out area that is under consideration for annexation. So as indicated here in the legend of the annexation map, only this hatch out area is the area of consideration, not the entire parcels. The applicant intends to construct 6 single-family residential lots in this particular area, and that will include extending the existing Municipal Hills Drive so as to provide the required right-of-way, public right-of-way for each of these properties. Staff, the plan of services will basically flow applicable as all city policies, both for water, sewer, schools, everything will apply. Staff has done the analysis on this. It indicates that the initial net fund, $48,857, and the estimated recurring revenue will be $38,057. The future land use map designates this area for residential development, and the developer is proposing to construct single-family residential lots. So his plan ties with the comprehensive plan or the future land use map of this property. The adjoining subdivision, namely the Municipal Hills subdivision, is in the R2 zoning district. That's low-density residential. Staff is recommending that the Planning Commission simply extend, or the City Commission simply extend this adjoining R2 zoning district into the area being requested for annexation. Staff therefore recommends that the Planning Commission approve the annexation request and recommend same to the City Commission, approve the plan of services and recommend same to the City Commission, and assign the R2 zoning district and recommend same to the City Commission.
Thank you. Any questions for staff?
Mr. Bernard, what is the difference in the net fund estimate, initial and recurring? Where's the $10,000 difference?
That is coming from,
It's tap fees.
it's water and sewer tap fees. Yeah. So he will purchase those water and sewer tap fees for the 6 lots when he construct the subdivision, and that will be it. Those tap fees will not be paid every year. And this estimate has been done using an average. If you look at the assessed property valuation for each of those lots, for each of the 6 lots, considering an average of the kind of development we have in Municipal Hills subdivision.
Any further questions?
Is
Commissioner
the,
Marcel?
is the stormwater that's going to be coming from these going to be able to be handled by the retention facility on site?
He will have to prove that in the construction plan. What is required on the preliminary plat, which is the next item we have on the agenda, is to show the area where that pond is going to be. But he will have to do all the engineering calculations and prove that this is going to meet that the existing pond will meet stormwater requirements. If it doesn't, then per our regulations, he will be required to provide that.
Would you mind going back to your 3 billets that you had for your 3 recommendations on this at the end, city's 3 recommendations? Approve. Okay, annexation. Okay. Okay.
Mr. Chair, can I add one item? Pardon me, so, just based on question and conversation at the workshop session, it was requested to provide average and median lot size in Municipal Hills, and then how that would compare to the proposed subdivision. I think normally we could bring this up during the preliminary plat conversation, but because you would be voting on the zoning at this portion, at least just for your benefit, it should be part of the conversation. What I found is that when you look at Municipal Hills, the smallest lot is .52, so right at half an acre. The largest lot is 1 acre, 1.01. So your average and your median are right next to each other, .67. The smallest lot proposed in the new subdivision of those 6 lots is .39, and the largest is .54. So the largest is just over half an acre with an average of .48. So a little bit smaller. I think from a planning perspective, we could. The only way you're going to guarantee any kind of a larger lot is if you downzoned it. I don't know whether or not that would be the most appropriate because it's completely surrounded by R2. So do you let the market decide that? But you're only off by about a quarter acre.
Thank you. All right, any further questions for staff regarding the annexation, the 3 recommendations? No, I'm seeing none. We'll go ahead and open this up for public comment. Anybody here wishing to speak for or against this annexation request, please come to the podium and give us your name and address.
Hello. I'm Bill Hawk, 39 Single Tree Court, and I'm the owner of this property. Of course, I'm forward to want to be in the city, need city services, fire, police, better insurance rates, city schools. My children have graduated, so I don't need that, but in the answer to the size of the lots, I have 2 pieces of property that I put together, and they're narrow in width. Actually, my lots are longer road frontage or just shorter from front to back. And as a realtor here in town, I've just come to realize people don't care that much about a lot of extra yard to mow unless they're looking for large acreage and they need to go a little further out for that. But happy to
But
answer.
the road frontage is very
The road frontage is
much in kind with what you see on
yes,
Municipal
yeah,
Hills.
125 to 150 feet, 135 feet of
Sure.
frontage. Yeah. And I've got one that's in the cul-de-sac back there that makes it a little bit smaller just because I've got the cul-de-sac bulbed out to one side, and I've got a larger cul-de-sac to try to help the fire department. A typical cul-de-sac radius is 50 feet, and I'm making this one 60 feet. So that should help fire trucks and stuff turn around. There's a lot of traffic that, doesn't realize it's a dead-end street up there and it's easy to turn around. So
Thank you very much.
thank you.
Do we have anybody else here wishing to speak for or against the annexation?
I actually live.
If you don't mind giving us your name.
Holly
Go ahead.
Gagne at 143 Simmons Ridge. If you
ma'am.
go back to the map, I'm actually in the subdivision behind him, so 2 of the lots would be right behind us.
Yes, ma'am.
We built last year. We were told there was an old drainage ditch. We had to put 180 yards of flow-fill concrete into the ground. We did not hit solid ground until we were 17 feet down. And so I am a little concerned about having this behind the house. Because if that's the bottom of the drainage ditch, I don't know what they will be building on, but.
I wanted to make sure I understood what
So
your
I'm
concern was. I
143.
was confused.
Right here, at the middle of the, yeah, right here. Right, this one right here.
Okay.
So in the back left corner, our lot is .62. We had to go down 17 feet to hit solid ground. And we put 180 yards of flow-fill concrete in there because there's a old drainage ditch that was at the basin of our property. So it just worries me with our slope lot where we're gonna be feeding into the crawl space or whatever's gonna be down there. I mean, it's a lot of water coming off of our property and the other properties next to us into this very short lot, that's right there. I don't know where the water will go, but it will go into that basement.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else wishing to speak for or against?
name is Beverly Whipke, 411 Mispa Hills Drive.
Yes, ma'am.
Just a couple of questions. Signage for Hawk Landing, is that going to be separate from Mispa Hills? Currently, there's a Mispa Hills sign. We're just wondering, as a resident, what that's going to look like. And then the biggest question that I have is home size. I've heard about the lot size, but are the home sizes going to be equal to what we currently have?
We can have some answers as far as what our responsibility is from a planning commission
Okay.
for that. We deal with zoning and appropriateness of zoning or annexation, but not necessarily dictating covenants for a particular subdivision or a homeowners association or groups. And so that's a little different. We'll talk a little bit about zoning and what is required in an R2 zone. We can have staff answer your questions that way.
Is there a way to ask Mr. Hawk that question?
Not in this
Separately?
forum. We're going to
Okay.
deal with that in a moment for you.
Okay.
As a courtesy.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. So we had a question on signage and on building sizes. Okay. Anybody else here wishing to speak for or against this annexation? Okay, seeing no one else wishing to speak for or against, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing. Thank you all for coming. Do appreciate your time being here. Mr. Bernard, can I ask you to address a couple of things for me? Number one, in R2 zoning, setbacks, building regulations on size, those types of things, can you give us some general ideas on what people can expect can be built in an R2? And then secondly, our lack thereof of restrictions on signage whenever we have an annexation or a subdivision plat approved. So if you don't mind just telling us a little bit about that.
Our zoning regulations do not control the size of a house on a lot, but we control the lot size, we control the setbacks. The R2 zoning district, which is the same thing you have on Municipal Hills, is minimum lot size is 15,000 square feet, minimum lot size. And then your setbacks, front yard, if you have a front-facing garage, you have to be a minimum 25 feet from the road. If you don't have a front-facing garage, because Municipal Hills Drive is a local street, your minimum required front yard setback will be 20 feet. Now that's a minimum. Of course, there are certainly houses on Municipal Hill Drive that may be at 30 feet, 40 feet from the road. That's okay. We only enforce the minimum. The side yard setback is 12 feet, side yard, and the rear yard setback is 30 feet. So that's the minimum. Once you set that envelope, the developer or the property owner can set the house inside there of any size. That's what we regulate.
Thank you very much.
Welcome, sir.
Just a shout out on some of the thought there. Again, we, as he was saying, can't set house sizes and those types of things, but when it's commercial development, whether it's a CVS going in at a corner lot or something happening anywhere in the city, we do encourage residents to discuss with the developer, talk to one another, and see what types of homeowner associations can be built, what kind of covenants or deeds, restrictions can be placed, what kind of things can be agreed upon as far as what you want to have built that they're agreeable to make the community make sense. Oftentimes it is market forces that are going to determine that, and no developer wants to build something that isn't going to return as well on his investment as he can. So they tend to build in like character as to what's in place. But those are reasonable questions. It's just where we as a body, we don't get to answer that or change those things. We get to discuss whether or not this is an appropriate annexation in the city. Is this an appropriate plat for the zoning? Is it like in kind? Is it with our land use plan? These are the questions that we have to ask and answer. So I wanted you to understand what we're trying to discuss and answer today, but also where concerned citizens need to really have a dialogue with the developer. It's very, very reasonable. Go ahead.
And with respect to the sign for subdivision, our zoning ordinance provides in Section 7.3, regulations on sign for subdivisions. And there is no restriction in terms of whether an adjoining subdivision on the same road can have a different sign. There's no requirement that they have to, they may not have a sign or they can have a sign. What we have in the code are basically requirements on if you're going to provide a sign, this is what it has to look like. For example, the sign shall not exceed 52 square feet in area. Ground-mounted signs located within the right-of-way, like if you're entering on Municipal Hills, there is a sign right there. Ground-mounted signs located within the right-of-way entrance shall be located in a median of not less than 50 feet in length and 10 feet in width, and shall be set back at least 10 feet from the right-of-way line when projected across the entrance. Signs located on the site of the entrance, like extending, since he's extending this road, he can put the sign on the side. So if he were to do that, such signs located at the side of the entrance must be located on private property within an easement. The petitioner shall provide documentation that the homeowners association has been created to maintain the sign. Because once you create it, you put a sign on that property, the developer is going to sell those pieces of properties and go away. Somebody needs to be maintaining those signs. So those are the regulations we have. No sign shall be internally illuminated. So you can't be having lights, within the residential district. Those are the regulations we have as far as subdivision signs are concerned. And we have this situation almost everywhere in the city, where streets connect to other streets. And we don't want subdivisions dead-ending everywhere. You have interconnectivity every now and then. And one subdivision connects to the other. When you're entering into another subdivision that connects to the other, you have a sign, either in the middle, in the median, or on the side of the property.
Right. Last thing, just to answer the questions, and we have time, the storm water on a lot, how is that handled by the city?
The city engineer, Alan? The engineering division reviews construction plans for subdivision. Thank you. So I would like Alan
Just
to
to-
answer.
At the
Let people know that we
annexation
are-
level, we're not into that yet.
Right.
Preliminary plat level, you're almost there. The next item on your agenda is preliminary plat approval. Preliminary plat is not required, does not require the developer to go to that detail of engineering yet. When the construction plans start, that's when we see that, those calculations. This preliminary plat shows a reserved area on the plat where he intends to build a detention basin, but it's not designed yet.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate Mr. Cantrell coming into the podium. That's to at least ally or help with concerns that the handling of stormwater should not be willy-nilly. There's a plan for it, and it does go through an approval process in the end. So it's a reasonable concern. There's people who actually study it and spend a lot of time working on it, as we will tonight. So, but thank you. Any further questions for staff at this point? Seeing none, I'm looking for a motion concerning the annexation plan of services agreement in the R2 zoning.
Motion to grant conditional approval of the plat for Hawk Landing subdivision.
Well, we need to have the annexation approved first. We need a motion for approval of the annexation into the city as an R2 zone with the plan of services agreement in place.
So moved.
Second that
Motion and
annexation.
second. No further discussion. Seeing none, go ahead and call the roll, please.
Commissioner Harrell?
Yes.
Commissioner Hickson?
Yes.
Commissioner Lowe?
Yes.
Commissioner Marchioni?
Yes.
Commissioner Wild?
Yes.
Commissioner Williamson?
Yes.
Chairman Zayons?
Yes.
Annexation approved.
So the next item on the agenda is connected with this annexation, and that is now consider preliminary plat approval of the Hawk Landing subdivision. This is the plat that we saw a song showing us.
Motion to grant conditional approval to the
We have a
Hawk
motion.
Landing subdivision plat.
And the conditions are based on?
I'd like to discuss this before we.
Very good. That's why
Please.
we stopped.
That's what I would too.
So, Song, why don't you go ahead and talk to us about the plat?
Chairman, Planning Commissioners, the
Just one moment, I'm sorry. Would you mind rescinding your,
I don't have to, it wasn't seconded.
okay, very nice. Let's, want to make sure we're in agreement with that, but I do want to make sure you're considered. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Before you is a preliminary plat for the Hawk Landing subdivision, which you just recommended for annexation by the City Commission. This preliminary plat proposes to create 6 single-family residential lots and to extend the existing Municipal Hills Drive further into this property to provide the required minimum right-of-way. The property that you recommended for annexation there are 2 parcels. And this property is split zoned as it is in the county right now. It is split zoned. The southern portion of it is zone R1 and the northern portion is zone A2 in the county. The A2 zoning district in the county requires minimum lot size of 1 acre. 1 acre. Which means lots 3, lot 4, lot 5, and lot 6 will have to meet county zoning if this property were not annexed into the city. The Planning Commission has subdivision jurisdiction over this because it is currently in the planning region. And in the Johnson City Regional Planning Region, the Planning Commission has approval authority over all subdivisions. This is the reason it's before you for consideration. Staff's recommendation is, 1, that this be approved subject to the City Commission approving the annexation of this property and assigning the R2 zoning district. Because without that annexation and without the assignment of the R2 zoning district, we will have a subdivision out there that does not meet county zoning. So if City Commission decides, for example, that no, we'd rather have not annex this at all, then the developer will have to change this plan and create a plat that will meet county zoning requirements and bring back before you for approval. Or if the City Commission decides we're going to annex this into the city, but change, give it a different zone, that will require that any of these proposed lot, the size be changed to meet the city zoning district, then this will need to be revised and brought before you again for consideration. So staff's recommendation is that the plat be approved, subject to annexation by the City Commission and the assignment of the R2 zoning district.
I have a question for you, Hassan. Given that the depth of these lots is not as large as the other lots that are adjacent to it, and the minimum setbacks, assuming a 20-yard front yard setback, and then, or 20-foot, and then a 30-foot rear. So we have at least 50 feet of setbacks to deal with. And then with the 2 sides being 12 each, you have 24. What is the depth of these lots? Because it's not shown on the preliminary plat. In other words, how large of a building envelope is going to be left, given those setbacks and given the depth of these lots?
The requirement, I don't have that number in front of me right now, but if I compare this with the adjoining subdivision, the requirement we have in the sub-regs is that the lots cannot exceed 3:1 ratio. So your lot width, your lot length, from here to there should not exceed 3 times from year to year. That's the regulation we have. This, from here to there, we do not regulate in our zoning code. We don't have a requirement for that. If a developer creates a lot this deep and ends up with, let's say, just a small area where you have to put your house. I mean, that's where the house will have to go. In creating these lots, the engineer working on this can look at that. The engineer working on this can look at that, and I can check a couple of other things and give you that answer if it's really necessary. But I don't think the engineer is taught in here, please.
He's here.
Taught. Quick question for you. You may have this on a layer that wasn't shown. He designed this, so I would like him to throw some light on that in terms of the depth.
How
of those
deep?
lots. Yeah.
All right. Good evening, Todd Wood, 1185 West Mountain View Road, 3204. That's Johnson City. So the lots on top, I believe, are 125 feet deep. The ones on the bottom, I think, are closer to 150. So if you have 30 in the back, 20, that's 50, you got quite a good size to put something in there. The ones on the cul-de-sac are a little bit shallower, but they're also wider. As Mr. Hawken mentioned before, he'd rather do a house that's wide than really deep anyway. And we actually have a grading plan of this where the back gets cut in and then the lower side gets filled, and the houses he wants to build will fit in there.
How will the building envelope be large enough to accommodate homes that are similar in size to the connecting subdivision, or will they have to be smaller?
I don't have the answer to that. I'm not exactly sure of how many square feet are in these. Some of them in there are pretty large. Those would not fit on these, especially the ones that are on a lot of, half acre or 3/4 of an acre.
I think we've morphed into public comment here instead of staff. So, thank you very much. Hey, Song, what else did you need to tell us about this? I know you were just trying to answer a question directly from the commissioner.
I have a question as well.
Yes, sir.
At what juncture do we address the public's concern about the stormwater drainage and that type of thing?
That is addressed in the construction plans. So the purpose of the preliminary plat is really to show how the lots are going to be laid out and to answer the question, do we have the utilities, the infrastructure to service this subdivision? If there is no water out there, there is no sewer, planning commission will turn it down. Or there is no street, there's no way you can put a road on that piece of property, then it gets turned down. The stormwater piece of it, at the preliminary plat, the requirement for the developer is to show where that water is going to be, where the stormwater detention pond is going to be. And then when you go into the construction plans, it takes a lot of engineering to do that, to do all the calculation and make sure. And of course, he will be considering all the water that is coming and ending up on this property right now and make sure that that water is contained. No developer certainly wants to build houses that the very next day you're going to have water come in and destroy those houses. So all of that is going to be piped and controlled on the side.
Any further questions for staff regarding this plat approval? No? Okay, seeing none, let's go ahead and open up for public comment regarding the plat approval here at Hawk Landing subdivision. Do we have anybody here wishing to speak for or against?
Bill Hawk
Bill,
again.
good to see you.
39 Single Tree Court, Johnson City. I should have brought that with me, but didn't think these questions would come up at this level. But the smallest lot, when you come in on the right side, if you're coming in on Municipal Hills Drive, that smallest lot right there has 174 feet of depth. The smallest lot out there at the end has 160 feet of depth. The lots on the bottom have 184 feet of depth, so they're good-sized lots. You could have a 100 by 100-foot house in there easy. I don't think anybody would build that one. And this has such a great view up there, just like Simmons Ridge. No prudent builder is going to pay $100,000 for a lot and build something small on it, unless there's some kind of idiosyncrasy that I don't know of, but it's easy for people to be afraid, and I understand that, and I'm happy to meet with anybody, and my plans are that the restricted covenants will be greater, not less, than Municipal Hills. Again, want to take advantage of the views out there. It's some awesome, awesome views. Not as good as Simmons Ridge, but better than Starling Springs below. So as far as signage, may have an entrance sign right there where the new section starts, just a little something that just identifies it, may not, but it won't have anything to do with the Municipal Hills sign down there. That'll be up to, probably the city will replace that when Knob Creek Road gets done. They'll make some provision to replace the Municipal Hills sign down there because it's going to be gone. And again, to answer some of the stormwater questions outside the box here is, the stormwater that serves Municipal Hills Drive will actually be where the new street of Municipal Hills Drives is when Knob Creek Road gets built. And so in the highway plans, they're building a larger detention basin down there because the requirements have changed since Municipal Hills Drive was done. So they're more stringent. It used to design for the 25-year storm event back in those days, and now it's the 900-year storm event. No, it's not that bad, but really, I'd love to alleviate anybody's fears. It's going to be a nice, nice subdivision. I plan on building out there myself, so,
Thank you very much.
yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else here wishing to speak for or against the subdivision plat approval? Okay. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and close public comment and ask for discussion on the commission. Keeping in mind the city's recommendation, staff's recommendation was approval of the plat condition upon annexation and R2 zoning by the city commission.
I would just like to add that they'll be easily be able to build good size houses on that,
Thank you.
comparable to Municipal Hills or even bigger. So you don't have to worry about that.
Motion to approve the R2 subdivision for the plat.
I'll second that.
So I'm going to try to restate that. We're going to say a motion to approve it conditional upon annexation and R2 zoning. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Correct, okay. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and call the roll.
Commissioner Harrell,
Yes.
Commissioner Hickson.
Yes.
Commissioner Lowe,
Yes.
Commissioner Marshoni,
Yes.
Commissioner Wild,
I'm going to abstain.
Commissioner Williamson,
Yes.
Chairman Ziones.
Yes.
Motion approved with conditions.
Thank you very much. That'll be end of item 3 on the agenda. We deferred item 4. Next will be consideration Oliver Springs subdivision final plat.
Chairman, Planning Commissioners, before you is a request to approve the final subdivision plat for Oliver Springs subdivision. This is a section of a subdivision originally known as Park Place Phase 3 subdivision. All that the developer is doing here is really changing the name, giving these 5 lots a new name, creating a new subdivision. And the purpose of this is it intends to create a new homeowner association that will be separate from the Park Place Subdivision Homeowner Association. The plat meets the subdivision regulation, meets zoning requirements. Staff recommends approval.
Thank you. Any questions for staff? Okay, seeing none, we have anybody here wishing to speak for or against the Oliver Springs subdivision final plat approval?
Point of order, could I withdraw from this discussion and make a short presentation on behalf?
Absolutely.
Yep.
I appreciate you doing that. Thank you.
I should have resigned long ago.
Give us
Paul
your name.
Williamson, 413 Oliver Approach,
Thank you.
Johnson City, Park Place subdivision. I'm currently the president of the HOA in the subdivision. I would say we have concerns, the residents would have concerns for the renaming of this particular area. The original intent, almost 22, 23 years ago, was for this whole area to be Park Place and remain Park Place. As an example, at the top right-hand corner, the Main Street Harbor approach was extended by Mr. John Isaac, and he had sold 4 lots in that particular area. He kept the name of Park Place, but he did maintain his own covenants for those 4 lots. I would just ask that consideration be given to leave this as Park Place and have Mr. Pitts as the developer create his own CCNRs, just like Mr. Isaac did. I don't think there would be any problem with that.
Thank you for your comment. Do we have anybody else here wishing to speak for or against the Oliver Springs subdivision plat approval?
Bill Hawk,
You just
39
won't go away
signature
tonight.
court. I'm here for everything tonight. I'm getting it all in on one night. I'm here representing, wearing a different hat as a realtor here for Mr. Petts. Hassan elegantly presented what his desire was the reason just to do a name change so that it would be a different homeowners association. He's not intending, as far as I know, anything to make it, less desirable. He wanted to have his own homeowners association, basically, because there is no, my understanding, there's no access to the lake anymore with Park Place. And that's really his only desire, is just to have a separate HOA. And he can do his own CCOs. It was never a part of Park Place. It was a part of the original concept plan. Way back when the Stevens and Steve Harris did it, it was part of that concept plan, but it's never legally, been a part of Park Place.
No
or
deed restrictions or anything like that?
It's not bound by their restrictive covenants, is what's important, is the restrictive covenants. It's bound by zoning, but he can do his own CCRs, his own covenants, and I understand a level of concern, but the reason is purely just so he can not have to talk to all the Park Place people at a HOA meeting. They can have their own HOA, and and that's whether that's a legitimate reason or not, but he just wants to be his own developer. He owns 25 acres to the east of this, that goes all the way to Wing Deer Park. And we've talked with John Isaacs about, building a street into him for future development and stuff like that.
This may be the beginning of
Yeah.
something else more.
Yeah, and it's not a deal killer to have the name change. It's just that if everybody wants to know it as Park Place, it's just there's a spring on the property he wants to save, and that was the old Oliver property, and it was Oliver Spring, and there's actually a headstone built in whenever that says Oliver on it, and it's just more of a personal idea than any other reason, I would think. But yeah,
Thank you for your
happy to
time.
answer any questions.
I got a question.
Yeah.
So, Bill, you're telling us he wants to go through all this just because he doesn't want to deal with the other people in the homeowner association?
Well,
Is that what I heard you say?
sort of, but not not to that extent. I mean, he's good friends with Mr. Williamson, and he's a good guy. He wants to do what's right. He just doesn't want to. I guess a fear of his 25 acres out there is that when the lake comes back and people are fighting for boat slips and they decide to raise dues and things like that, he just don't want to be a part of that battle. He's battle weary from other projects in other areas, not here, but
Okay.
again, it's not going to. The restrictions are going to be okay. It's just really the HOA that he'd have his own HOA. So that's sort of the crux of it, really is. Concern with the lake.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions?
Thank you.
Bill,
you. Oh, here we go.
is he intending to expand to the east?
Yes,
And would he want this subdivision name to continue?
yes, that was.
That's fine.
Yeah, because I wanted him to call it, this is Park Place, I wanted him to call it Park Hills, because this is the hill. I wanted to keep the name Park in there personally, is what I recommended, but he wants, he's a developer and he wants his name. He's from California, but he's got ties. His mother was born here, and she's related to this property. So it's turned into a personal type thing with him.
Great. Any further questions? Sir? No?
Thank you.
Not a bill.
Okay.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, anybody else here wishing to speak for or against the Oliver Springs plat approval? All right, seeing none, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing and open up for discussion on the commission. Yes, sir.
My question is, how small do we go? If one property owner wants to rename his, do we consider that?
Well, according to talking to ASONG, I'm going to call my own lot Z Springs subdivision, actually. And I can do it. And so- There you go.
I want to say, are you finished, or was that your only comment?
No, that was my point. I mean, where do we stop?
It's a peculiar thing, I understand, but I don't think there is, that's what we had talked about earlier, is that there is, to my knowledge, a way to govern the naming of the subdivision. It changes each time the plat changes, and not only that, and correct me if I am wrong, Mr. Mitchell, so also the city intends to have subdivisions interconnect with streets. It's been kind of part of the plan and the usual thing. For example, we can drive from Sterling Springs right into Municipal Hills, and you never know when you change. Or somebody could have put a sign there. And so it's somewhat arbitrary to set an exact lot number at which you can do that, and we don't have anything in our subdivision regulations that speaks to or against that. Is that correct? Is that accurate? Okay, very good.
See, I somewhat disagree, though, Tim, because I believe as you drive from one subdivision into another, even if there's not signage, there's often some type of distinction. Like going from Sterling Springs into Mizpah, you notice the
Sorry, we
change.
closed the public comment. I apologize.
You notice a change in lot size somewhat. You notice the absence of sidewalks in one, the presence in the other. So there are some distinctions, and
Not that there's not distinctions, but they're not regulated in our subdivision regulations.
well, that is,
And that is a different thing. What
And-
we are allowed to do is based on regulations,
and
not
that's
on
true, but
whimsical needs of the
I
board.
think it's, it's somewhat concerning to me that you're suddenly building a new subdivision adjacent to one without having distinct signage or something. It almost, I don't know if our regulations need to be addressed or something where we require new signage, or is one subdivision playing off the attributes of another in some cases, be they positive or negative?
I think those are
I'm not
great
sure.
philosophical questions that, in light of what we've done as a city, we have never enforced anything like that. You can drive from one subdivision to another all up and down Carroll Creek Road.
Right.
And there's plenty of places around the city where that happens. And I don't know how you would begin to even enforce that, but we certainly, on the fly tonight, can't come up with a new subdivision regulation or application that we would want to, and that's not what we're being asked
I
tonight.
fully agree.
So, I mean, that might be a subcommittee discussion of how do we want to handle signage and subdivision breaks in the future, but I don't know that that's a discussion for tonight, frankly.
I
mean,
agree, I just think it
It's
needs to be.
bizarre.
It needs to be
But
brought up, because this is two instances in the same night,
Sure.
and this is something, after sitting on this board for several years, I've never encountered before, so I don't know if it's something that we're going to see more of in the future, but I think people are going to express concerns, and so perhaps it's something that at least
I
stands
think
discussion outside of this
That's a legislative
meeting.
discussion that would go to the city commission for, to take changes, and I think there's an appropriate forum for that. But the other thing, I mean, if you fast forward however many years, if this does turn into Oliver Springs subdivisions, it's going to, by mass size, it's going to equally, it'll stand on its own there quite nicely, and also differentiate itself, so it's not absolutely unreasonable, would be my opinion.
Can I ask a neutral question? I'm going to abstain, but I just need just a neutral question. I mean, make sure I understand. So anybody in Johnson City wants to come in and carve out a section, do they still have to come to the planning commission to get it renamed? I mean, maybe I misunderstood what you said.
If it is a two-lot minor subdivision,
Exactly.
where you're just cutting one lot into two, and let's say this was lots 1 and 2, or maybe just lot 1 of the Hill subdivision, and you decide to create 2 lots, lot 1A and 1B, of the Hill subdivision. Often what you will get written in this area, that's where the name of the subdivision is written. It will be replat of lot 1 of the Hills subdivision. Most often it will be maintained, at that small scale. It will just be replat of lot 1 of the Hills subdivision. But in a situation where there are more than 2 lots involved, state law only permits us to approve plats administratively if you have just 2 lots, at most 2 lots. Either you are creating 2 lots or you are taking 2 lots and turning them into 1. Once you go above 2, the Planning Commission has to look at it.
But to be fair, we can only consider
Or 5
the
acres,
plat.
correct? Is it under 5 acres? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. There's an acreage.
Yes, the acreage is part of it. If all the lots, or the parcels that you are creating, if all of them are more than 5 acres, and there is no construction of infrastructure such as water and sewer line or new streets involved, then you don't even come to us or to the Planning Commission.
So just for purposes of my clarity, we're being asked to consider the final plat tonight, not the name.
No,
Yeah, no,
That's not under the purveyance of this commission.
exactly.
strictly speaking, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
It's not really anything we can deal with. Perfect.
And controlling the name will be very similar to the arguments we've had in court on whether the public can control. It borders into issues of free speech.
We've been down that road with signage before.
So, yeah, this is about signage. There are matters of
Exactly.
free speech. You can't tell somebody if you're putting out your sign in a subdivision, you must use this name. No, there are issues
911
of free
concerns, and you
speech.
can't, there's all that, but that's it. And so if we had a 911 or a safety concern based on things like that, then you would have a voice, but that's pretty much it.
And 911, generally, they will go with the name on the street.
Right.
If you call 911 and you say, I'm on lot 1 of the Municipal Hill subdivision, 911 will be
Doesn't matter, we
where?
don't care. That's
Where?
not what it goes, exactly. Okay, do we have any further discussion regarding this plat approval? Nope. Okay, and seeing none, we just need somebody to make a motion, one way or the other.
I move to approve the Oliver Springs subdivision final plat.
Motion to and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'm going to ask you to call the roll.
Commissioner Harrell,
Yes.
Commissioner Hickson.
Yes.
Commissioner Lowe,
Yes.
Commissioner Marshoni,
Yes.
Commissioner Wild,
Yes.
Commissioner Williamson,
Abstain.
Chairman Ziones.
Yes,
Motion approved.
thank you. All right. We will move on to item number 6 on our agenda, which would be consider final plat, replat of Lot 71 of the Village at Beechwood Meadows, Phase 1, Section 3 subdivision. So we are, right. We'll ask for go ahead, Asong, do your part first.
Mr. Chairman, Planning Commissioners, before you is a request to consider final plat approval for replat of Lot 71 of Phase 1, Section 3 of the Beechwood Meadows subdivision. The Planning Commission initially approved this plat, creating this subdivision. That was in November 2017, precisely November 14, 2017, and it was subject to 4 conditions. One of the conditions was that Lot 71 on that plat be reserved for the construction of a detention basin, unless the developer agrees with the owner of Lot 19, who is Mr. Gary Phillips, on the use of this detention basin for the management of stormwater on this entire subdivision, which is Phase 1, Section 3. The second condition was, which was an alternative, if you don't reserve that, then what a developer could do was to seek a declaratory judgment from court on whether he has rights to use that detention basin on Lot 19. A third was for the developer, if the developer shall construct a detention pond on Lot 71, if the set agreement between Mr. Gary Phillips, who owns Lot 19, and oath is not reached, so he will be required to construct a detention pond on that Lot 71. And lastly, if the owner of Lot 19, Mr. Gary Phillips, dedicates to and the City of Johnson City accepts ownership of Lot 19, then Lot 71 shall become a buildable lot. That's an option that the city provides to developers for residential subdivision. You can dedicate those detention ponds to the city will assume ownership and future maintenance of them. What the developer did, Gooch and Old, they submitted the final plat and went with the first condition. Lot 71, hatch out here, was reserved for the construction of a stormwater detention basin, which allowed them to record the plat, began building on the subdivisions, and then at the beginning of this year, they filed the lawsuit for a declaratory judgment in court. Also, he was back before the Planning Commission asking for the renewal of the bond, asking for additional time for that declaratory judgment to be made in court, which the Planning Commission granted 6 months. Between then and now, the subdivision is under development, as you see. It's under construction. This is Lot 71. It is currently vacant based on that reservation that was made on the plat. So it has not been built, while other lots are under construction. From February to today, he has submitted a new plat to the Planning Commission, which is a replat of Lot 71. And this replat eliminates that reservation of Lot 71 for possible construction of a detention pond in future, pending the declaratory judgment. So if you look at these two plats, the original plat or the initial plat in 2017, Lot 71 is hatched out. You don't have that on the plat before you for consideration for approval today. The two key questions that are always before the Planning Commission when you have a subdivision plat for approval was, and that's what we handle in all the construction plans, was, is, and would there be adequate infrastructure to manage the stormwater from Beechwood Meadows Phase 1 Section 3 subdivision? We have to make sure that infrastructure is available at every time that we are approving a final subdivision plat. And secondly, does the plat meet the subdivision regulations and associated zoning ordinance? The lot as it is the same lot. The size of the lot has not been changed. The dimensions of the lots have not been changed. The zoning district has not changed from what was approved in 2017. So from a zoning perspective, it meets zoning requirements. This first part of that second question, whether it meets subdivision regulations, is tied to the question of the availability of stormwater infrastructure, because our stormwater regulations require that. I will ask Mr. Alan Cantre, the city engineer, who deals with issues of stormwater, to kind of present to the Planning Commission a history of this, more in depth. He was here from the very beginning when this entire subdivision was proposed for construction, and then he will speak into the sufficiency of stormwater infrastructure on site to provide more to the Planning Commission. And then after that, the city attorney is available. He will provide some light in terms of the legal issues that may be involved in this.
Thank you. Hello, Mr. Cantrell, thank you.
I want to switch to another presentation. Just so you're kind of familiar, you've seen the maps and so forth, but it's this section right here that the new developer, Orth, and his partners are building the new homes on. The detention basin is here, that is in dispute. The subdivision has a ridge right near the backside of these homes, so the drainage is split up into one valley over here and one valley over here. So he actually built a detention basin here for this side, and he built a detention basin here for this side. The high point is somewhere right in here where water splits and runs down that way, or it runs back here to this and down through here. The development was split up into phases. This little simple sketch shows you the phase one, section one is all this in white. The detention basin was part of that. It's on this lot right here. Section two of phase one was up here along the road, and then this green was phase two, and this over here was to be phase three. It's future, it hadn't happened. But you can see some grading on the previous picture here where you can even see the imprint of the road where it got started and stopped construction. So this would have been phase three. To keep you straight, we're talking about this phase one, section three, the yellow, which is in the valley that drains to that detention basin. And this over here drained to a detention basin here. This area has a detention basin planned for here. This green area drains to a detention basin that was placed approximately here in that phase. So it's kind of interwoven and mixed up. So this detention is in this section. And the new developers bought that detention basin. It was built by the previous developer, but when they bought this tract for the yellow, these lots had not been created. A plat was submitted to us. We saw a concept plan before the Plan Commission. It was approved in May of 2002. Construction plan phase started, and we approved that in October of 2002. This phase two and phase three, the two things on this green and this came next in 2003. Phase one, section one was finally platted. That would be this white area in October of 2003. That included the detention basin. This is the concept plan that was submitted and approved in 2002, which involves all of this, and there's the lot for the detention basin. Over here was one of these lots was used for the other detention basin. The construction plans were developed and dated here in 2002. That's the cover sheet. I took a sheet out of those plans. This shows you the drainage layout. We have catch basins starting up here on the entrance road. All of this is piped down through here to this detention basin. Let go, it goes off into this future phase. The ridge is right through here, so pipes were installed or planned here in this street that was purchased by the new developer, and it is piped to this detention basin. So these are the construction plans that show you how the phase one was split up. This handles that side, this handles this side. This is the plat that was recorded. Here's the recording stamp of the detention basin. I'm going to zoom in here if I can. It's hard to read, but Lot 19 is reserved for use as a detention basin on the plat right there. Then all the way across here, I'll stay at this zoom and just pan across. This is identified as Lot 19 detention basin. Here's the future, and a easement has been platted where the road will go to bring this water from this phase that was getting built over here for this future development. So an easement was platted through this property for stormwater to come down and follow along here and dump into the basin. Now, eventually, a road would get built along that easement. Section 2 of Phase 1 is built over here. This is the plat. Here's the recording stamp. And its drainage, for the most part, goes down here. But in this area, this area right in here will drain this way into this detention basin over here. This is the concept plan. At that time, we didn't call it preliminary plat, but we were calling them concept plans. And that's Phase 2 on one side of Phase 1, and this is Phase 3 on the other. This got eventually turned into that loop we saw earlier. This is how Phase 2 drains into this section. This drainage leaves this detention basin, follows pipes along that street, and goes into Lot 19 at the other end of this. So all of this area drains here and goes down that street and drains into Lot 19. That's just the plat. Here's the recording stamp on it of that phase. I'll just show you again here, this is the future detention basin. If they follow this plan, this has actually been dug out. So it's already started, but it's been stopped due to the financial issues. Down on the corner, our Lot 19 where the detention basin is over here, this is the lot across the street from it, and it's not part of the plat that's before you tonight, but it's part of that Phase 1, Section 1. A replat took place on it that enlarged an easement along this side and this side, and that was for drainage to come from here. These lots here don't drain up to the street. They drain to the backyards of those lots and down through here. So this easement was put here beside this lot before a house was built here to allow this drainage from this row of lots that would be up that way to drain here and get to that detention basin. We did review a final plat back in 2007. The original developer proposed to lay the lots out like this. A change had been made. This street was removed, and that's where we have a walking path or bike walking path going in there. So from the original concept, a street is gone from here. But basically, this is what you have tonight. This lot that I last showed you with an easement across it, and also one up the front right here, was that. Okay? So this is the original plat. It was never recorded. So these lots, although intended by the map here, was not followed through on. And so it was left as a single tract of land. So the new developers, if they wish to have lots similar to this, have to do their own plat. And this is what the result was. And Asang's already shown you this. And this is the restricted lot for their detention. When this one came in, we were fully believing that this had been built for all of this to be developed and to provide detention for it. However, we started to get phone calls, and we received a letter to the then Director of Development Services stating that Mr. Phillips had recently purchased this back. He originally owned it, it left him, and it came back to him. And that he had other intentions for this, and that clouded the issue of whether or not this would be available for this. So the story, as you hear it, starts there, as it came to you in November of 2017. We're starting to kind of wonder if, what is this still going to be available? There's some legal questions we needed answered, and that's where we left off at that time, and you know the results from his presentation.
Tell me again about Lot 19 and where it was reserved for use.
Okay, we go back to the plat that created Phase 1, Section 1, and this is the plat, and I'll zoom in again. There are plat notes here that place restrictions. Let me go to directly answer your question a little bit roundabout way, but there's a note here, if I can find it. I apologize. Here it is. There aren't little lines on each lot edge that show this 7.5-foot easement. that is 7.5. This is a poor quality scan. It came from the county's records where they scanned it and put it into the system. We have a version of this that's not stamped as recorded. It's clear, but I don't want to use it because it's not shown as recorded. It's identical to this. You can read it. But that's 7.5 foot, and our regulations require that you have an easement around your lot lines, but we don't draw it. We put it in a note. All right, so an easement's not drawn around the detention basin, but you have language here that says Lot 19 is reserved for use as a detention basin.
And this was recorded.
This was recorded. And the recording date on this is 2003, October the 24th, 2003. So it was done at the time the original developer was still in control of the majority of the land around there. So the full intention was for that to serve that future side. And again, I point out that this easement that's coming right where the street eventually gets built is bringing drainage from this area that can't make it over the hill into that other detention basin. So it's along the back of this lot and down through here, and this is also, it could also be used for water and sewer lines. But it's, now the natural drainage of this area is flowing all down against the hillside right here and flowing below this lot that's right here. And you'll see an easement there, and there's an easement right here. It says existing 15-foot wide drainage and utility easement. Apparently there was an existing easement there that got shown on this plat. It already existed. Well, that's where the natural flow of water from the undeveloped land would go. Once a road is built, the lots on this side are getting caught in the road and sent through pipes, and the water that rains here will go to the natural flow path along the valley between the hill and this slope going back this way, and it'll flow here to the street. And there's a low point in the street somewhere about right here. So the drainage will either go to that lot 19 through the street that gets built here, or it'll follow this natural flow path to a pipe that's extended to this point right here.
Thank you for filling that in. Do we have, Mr. Cantrell, do you have anything else to tell us about this?
I guess I gave you a list. The only thing I did not include on that list is as-built drawings. Yeah, here we go. Here's where I want to be. There are as-built drawings. Okay, this is as-built, it says Phase 1, but it's not all of Phase 1. Because that Section 3 of Phase 1 is shown here, but it's cut out by, you see the bold line is showing us what this set of plans is going to cover. It's not going to cover what's outside here. So we look at the as-built plans and go over a few pages. This won't scroll to the next page easily unless I do this. So this surveyor that's doing the as-built is showing all these replats that have taken place in there by the time he's doing the as-built. Here we're seeing the pipe work on this part that flows into a detention basin right here. What we're really here tonight to understand is there's a detention basin here on lot 19, and if we zoom in on that, you'll see the pipe work that's dumping the water into that lot. This pipe is stubbed up in the direction of the future development that we're considering tonight, brings it into this pipe over to here and dumps it into the basin. This is the outlet pipe to the basin. The berm for the basin would be across that pipe. This is a pipe coming from the other basin. It's already been detained, so it's releasing the water from the other basin on the outside of this basin. And it runs down here and follows the natural flow path.
As
there.
engineered, this was seen as adequate to handle that Section 3.
This all met our standards, yes. Now, the maintenance of any of these basins is going to be the responsibility of whoever owns them, unless they're given to the city. Then we will maintain them. But as long as they're owned by a private party, it's that party's responsibility to keep these in working order and to keep them safe. So I just wanted to show you the as-built.
Thank you.
That the piping shows up on the as-built. This is a small pipe that drains this yard in that direction. And you see these dotted lines here? That's that easement I showed you on that individual one lot. I think they realized later that they needed to have a larger pipe here than versus this pipe. I'm not really sure about that, but the pipe that's right here is not shown here. That's pretty much all I have. I just want to explain that the subdivision was a split. It's not all going to one basin. The majority of it that was built early goes to a separate basin. Some of the lots in phase 1, section 1 do drain to lot 19, but the majority of the drainage coming to lot 19 is the undeveloped part.
Thank you, sir. Go ahead, Nason.
For the city commission comes in, there's this plat that I shared with you. The highlighted notes, that is a note you were trying to read. I noticed it was very small and commissioners were straining. So those highlighted notes on that larger piece, that is what Alan was trying to emphasize for you.
Thank you very much. I think there may be more to be said a little later, but why don't we go ahead and open up public comment for a moment now? If anybody here would like to speak for or against, we'll invite and open up public comment at this moment. Please keep your comments to the original presentation here to 10 minutes to present a case, and those speaking for or against, we can keep their comments down to 3 minutes, please, and then you can petition for more time if necessary. Thank you very much.
Please, the commission, my name is Eddie Pratt. I'm an attorney with Baker Donaldson in the Knoxville office. I'm here on behalf of Googe Homes and North Construction.
Yes, sir.
And I was the signer of the applicant, for the applicant's petition to have final approval for rezone of lot, or replat of lot 71, removing the restrictions. First, I would like to draw attention to something that the city engineer pointed out, and that was the plat that was approved in November of 2017 by this body, and I believe that, is that the one that was?
October 2000.
November.
This is the one that was approved.
November 14,
Yes.
2017. Yep.
Is there a way to zoom on that? Toward the top, there's a note on this plat that says Lot 71 is reserved for a,
I'm sorry, I want to be clear. I want you to have plenty of time to present your case, so please don't feel hurried. We don't have a large number of people here wishing to speak, so if there's a principle for and a principle against, I want to make sure you have plenty of time to present those cases. I think that's fair, given our time and what we're here to do. So I didn't want to put any undue pressure on you on a time tonight. That is not the spirit of what we're here to
slow
do.
down a little bit then.
No, please present it clearly and help us understand.
Sure. If you'll note, this is the plat approved by this body in November of 2017, and in particular, there's language here at the top of the plat that says, Lot 71 is reserved for a second basin unless the reservation is removed, it's either removed or reversed by the city of Johnson City. So as an attorney looking to the status of plat approval, there were conditions placed that, as I read this, meant that there were additional administrative procedures that needed to be followed in terms of determining exactly what was going to ultimately happen in Lot 71. So it is in that vein and in that posture that the petitioners are back before this body seeking a final approval for removal of the conditions on Lot 71. And as we read this plat, it did contemplate future action to be taken by this body and before my clients had an opportunity to seek other redress beyond the administrative procedures. So I would bring that to the Planning Commission's attention first. The application then rests on several grounds. The first was, as we observed as the planner set forth early on in the presentation, there were several conditions on this plat and in the minutes that were imposed on approval of this plat. So we went to look for the authority for that approval and then the approval that had been adopted by Johnson City. There's a statute, the Tennessee legislature adopted a statute, it's Tennessee Code Annotated 13-4-403. And it says regional planning commissions can adopt regulations providing for authority to impose conditional restrictions. And those can be road, infrastructure, other kinds of conditions that may be placed on approval or the ability to impose a bond. And when we then went to the subdivision regulations, yes, Johnson City has adopted subdivision regulations, but they've never implemented the authority that the legislature granted under that statute to have conditional approval on plats. You could have done it. There was nothing in the regulations that have been implemented that allows the city to impose conditional restrictions. So in looking at that, we have a plat that's been approved, and our estimation and our position is that the conditions exceeded the authority that Johnson City has in terms of what it has adopted. It has the ability to adopt those. It has yet to do so. And so that is the petitioner's first position, that the conditions that are on this plat are void from inception, the plat itself being fine, other than the restrictions. So then our second position, and I think the second position renders moot the other issue, and that is there's a body of law that says when one person owns a tract of land and establishes conditions and rights, easements for development of that land, i.e. when there are drainage pipes and easements established into a drainage basin, and then that property may be sold off to different owners, then because a dedication that was in place when one person owned it all is imposed on that piece of property, just because the first owner no longer owns it doesn't destroy the easement rights. It runs with the land. It's called an easement appurtenant.
Exactly.
And so that has been our position, that in 2003, when this plat was recorded, and we looked at the earlier plat with the detention basin being dedicated, Lot 19, it was dedicated as a detention basin for all the properties that the owner owned at the time. Mr. Phillips owned the property, Section 1, Phase 1. He owned Section 1, Phase 3 at the time, or Phase 1, Section 3 at the time that he dedicated that detention basin. So as a result, when the bank foreclosed and took the property, it had the easement rights into Lot 19. Substitute trustee, when she foreclosed and owned it, she had the rights. And when she transferred it to the bank owned it. And when the bank then sold it to Orth and Googe, they likewise had the rights for drainage into this drainage easement, into this detention basin. To support that position, I can present that as the law, but we went and found an expert. And Mr. Robbins has provided his expert opinion here. And under the law, easements appurtenant can be created two ways. One way, you can create it by an express grant, or two, it can be by implication. That you've always used it that way, and so by usage and tradition, by implication, an easement can be created that's appurtenant. There's case law, and he provided the case law with his opinion in Tennessee that says if you record a plat that has an easement on it, that recorded plat is an express grant. So that's as good as writing an easement agreement and the owner signing it and recording it in the Register of Deeds office. So there is an express grant by virtue of the plat from 2003 being recorded that reserves Lot 19 as a detention basin. And what's even more interesting here in this situation, the as-built drawings. Mr. Phillips himself actually buried the pipe in the ground that ran across the property that that Orth and Googe ultimately purchased. So when the as-bills were submitted and the city stamp is on the document that the city engineer provided, the city has accepted those as-built drawings. Those as-built drawings show the very pipes Mr. Phillips himself installed servicing the property that is now in dispute, running under Chesterfield Drive into the detention basin. And there's two separate pipes servicing this property that run under the road into that detention basin. We have other information I can provide that deals with the practicality of even building on a detention basin on Lot 71 as the way it is today, and the proof can come in through another engineer. To build a detention basin on Lot 71, the water still has to go into Lot 19 and come back out under the street into Lot 71. So it would be a futile exercise to force this developer to continue with this restriction on Lot 71, and we'd ask that the commission can vote in favor of removing the restrictions on Lot 71 as a detention basin.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I would like to hear from the next person wishing to speak for or against.
Good evening.
Hello.
Sarah Sims from Penn Stewart. I'm here on behalf of the owner of Lot 19, Phillips Rental Properties.
Sims? Sarah Sims?
Yes, Sarah
Thank you.
Sims. To the extent that Lot 19 is affected by this approval of this replat, the owner of Lot 19 is opposed to it. The owner of Lot 19 is currently vigorously defending a claim that in which the plaintiff, which is Orth Construction, has asked the court to declare an easement on Lot 19. I know that you all have been provided with various opinions of various legal counsel with regard to these easement rights. However, they're really immaterial here. I mean, this is for the court to decide. This is very new litigation. It was filed on February 5th of this year. The plaintiff we had motions set in this case. Just recently, the plaintiff asked that we postpone those motions. If these easements truly were so cut and dry and they had such a clear case, I'm unsure why they would be postponing that. And the fact of the matter is these easements are not as cut and dry as Mr. Pratt has expressed. These are complicated issues that really can only be decided by the chancellor, and it is in front of him to decide. So I ask you that the approval of this plat at this juncture really is, the timing is just wrong. At this time, the court being the only party that can determine whether these easements actually exist, they haven't ruled on it. And if this body does approve this plat, and then in 6 months, 9 months, a year down the road, the court it rules that these easements, that the easement that has been referred to actually does not benefit the lots that were purchased by Orth and Googe, then you have a plat that is approved that doesn't have satisfactory stormwater maintenance. And that will be where the city stands. And that is a very real possibility. No one here can really predict the outcome of that case. But the approval of this plat would be your decision based on a prediction of the outcome of that case, which I don't know about you, but I don't really like to predict outcomes of courts. I inevitably will be wrong. I will speak briefly to the specifics of the easement that was discussed earlier by Mr. Cantrell, Asong, and Mr. Pratt. I believe that this plat here does reserve an easement on lot 19 for drainage. I'm sorry, more for detention. It does that for benefit of these lots. These lots are not the lots that Mr. Googe or Orth purchased. These are the lots that were developed by Mr. Phillips, and we don't dispute that these lots can drain onto lot 19. However, it is these lots, not platted on here, or any other lots. In fact, there's no. I'm sorry, I think I might be looking at is this. I apologize, I'm trying to use his slides. Can you? The first plat.
The lawyers have moved my slides.
I'm sorry, we've messed everything. But
Give me a second. This is the one that was approved in 2017,
okay, where's
And then
the
this is-
one that was the initial plat, the first plat?
the very first plat.
The plat that shows lot 19.
Plat that shows lot 19. That's
If we don't have it, I think you can understand. We remember he showed the highlighted sections
they
here.
have it. It is this
These,
plat. And this is lot 19.
right.
And that is in
And I think you all have passed around this and saw the highlighted portions. So lot 19 is depicted on this plat along with a set of lots. Those lots have the right to drain onto lot 19. However, not depicted on here is any other property. It's not drawn. So there are many arguments that the validity of an easement benefiting any other lots, meaning subsequent lots purchased by Orth Construction and Googe, would not have that same benefit. Easements are rights among parties. Just because it's shown on a plat doesn't mean that everybody has the right to use it. That is something, again, that the court has to determine. And I mean, there are multiple other issues that will arise throughout the course of this litigation, and many defenses to the claim that the section 3 of this development actually is benefited by that easement. But that has to come up in the course of the litigation. And it would be a mistake today here for this body to determine that those easements exist as a matter of law. This board is not an adjudicative board, nor it does not have the power of the authority to do that, and I strongly urge you not to. I don't want to belabor the point of the validity of the easements or the legal enforceability of them, of the easements claimed, because it is simply something that has to play out within the litigation. So unless anyone has any further questions.
Do we have any questions? Ms. Sims?
I would also like to state that you've seen lots of depictions and drawings of the drainage, but concept plans and anything that is not filed with the Register of Deeds simply doesn't create the legally enforceable rights, and they're really immaterial to the discussion here. This really needs to play out in a court of law where it is currently being litigated. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Asking for anybody else wishing to speak for or against?
Good evening, Todd Wood again, here on behalf of the applicant. Just want to point out, with the conditions that are on here, I got involved in this back in January. The applicant asked me to look at the condition about Lot 71. And one thing I want to point out, if a pond were to be designed on Lot 71, that water is going through the drainage system in the backyard of Lot 74 and going right into Lot 19, which is a detention pond. So I just want to make that clear. Whether there's an additional pond on this section, it's going through the detention pond on Lot 19.
Thank you. Anybody else wishing to speak for or against? I saw somebody making a motion.
Bill Hawk again. I really don't have a dog in this race, but I wanted to point out, I've been a professional surveyor for over 40 years. I've been a realtor for over 25 years.
Yes, sir.
In the good old days, the city owned the easement area. It should be dedicated, and I would like to see a recommendation to the city commission that we go back to that. The city maintains roads, that's what a city is for. They didn't like to maintain these detention basins, so it was put up on a homeowners association. Well, the homeowners associations can go defunct. And then the guy that lives next door to the detention basin, he's got to do it, or it doesn't get done. So please make a recommendation, City Commission. Let's get this back in the city's hands.
I think
we wouldn't even be here tonight.
If you talk to the city, I think you'd find that they're more than willing to take on detention basins and would prefer to deal with it that way, frankly.
That's
That's
where we
typically
need to
how
be
that
now.
goes, and that was actually option number 4 on that deed in 2017.
Thank you.
So, all right. Anybody else here wishing to speak for or against?
Jason Johnston, 1500 Kings Row. I'm against this. I have property that adjoins over down below Lot 19, so I do have an interest in this. I am the real estate agent for Mr. Phillips on this particular lot. One of the things that you guys expressed in the meeting previously was that two parties get together and, work together to get this resolved. Mr. North has never, ever presented an offer to us in writing, so we have not had a chance to negotiate any of this. It apparently has gone to litigation prior to any offer or any cooperation, or lack of cooperation, I should say, on their part. And we've been perfectly open and honest, and I've got emails where I've reached out to Terry for offers. So we haven't delayed this process. We're not holding it up. We just have not been able to speak until we were invited to go to court, or Mr. Phillips was invited to go to court. So in my opinion, I've been in real estate for 30 years. Landowners have rights. What was discussed by Mr. Cantrell in the last meeting that I attended regarding this matter on a different piece of property is he said those laws were created by the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation to protect neighbors of property so that they don't get water pushed upon them, or you're not taking on somebody else's problem. If he's allowed to put this water in that detention basin, you basically have a developer that has no liability for his own stormwater. He bought this as is, where is, as a foreclosed piece of property. He should have known before he closed on that what detention basins were available and what potential problems he was going to have. My mother was previously the owner of this detention pond, and I thank Gary Phillips highly for buying this back because he saw this problem coming long before I did. So this is not something new. And there's more to the issue than just a detention pond. So I would just like to say that I do oppose the allowance of the water being pushed onto our property. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I make an additional brief statement?
And I will allow the same for the others in kind.
As far as allowing for the court to decide, Mr. Phillips can't have it both ways. His motion pending in the court now says that the plaintiffs have failed to state any claim and the court can grant no relief. And so they can't have it both ways, come here and tell this body that the court needs to decide it, and tell the court can't decide it. And so I would just ask, and we're not asking this this body to make a determination about whether an easement exists or not. That's information to provide for purposes of actually supporting what's going on today. The water's draining under Chesterfield Drive from this property into this detention basin based on pipes Mr. Phillips constructed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Sims, if you'd like to reapproach for equal time.
Thank you. The nature of, or the choices made in the defense of our client in the litigation is really also immaterial here. We made certain choices that I don't feel as though we have to defend in terms of what motions were filed. Again, the import of this is simply that the court can decide that this easement on lot 19 does not benefit the lots owned by Googe and North. And then, again, you are left with a plat that is approved that does not have appropriate stormwater drainage. And that is just fundamentally why this is the wrong timing for this approval. Let this play out in the court system, and then maybe we meet again. But today, I urge you to not approve this plat.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, do we have anybody else wishing to speak for or against this replat? All right, thank you all for coming, and I appreciate your time and helping to teach us more about what the problem is and what we need to look at. So we'll go ahead and close the public hearing at this point and open up for discussion on the commission. I'll frame the discussion and then leave it to the members of this board. We have been asked to replat, removing Lot 71 as reserved for a retention pond. The questions at hand would be twofold. Would this new replat meet engineering specifications that would be adequate for a subdivision for drainage if it were to be removed as required? Number two, do we have a reasonable expectation that there will be responsible flow of water off? Do we have an easement appurtenant here for this? So that's the question. It is the city's, my understanding and feeling that we needed to look at this is that, yes, an easement appurtenant is made. The question was brought up as to timing on this, and I believe that in good faith, in trying to serve the public who wishes to be able to develop properties and also to protect owners of properties from stormwater drainage in case there was any concerns, we allowed this plat to be approved in 2017, and I was here on the commission at that time with the conditions in place that were done in good faith so that the public was protected, but also the developer was respected of his rights to work forward. And I think that was reasonable. There's a question as to whether or not we were within our ability to do that, and I understand there's a concern on that. I just want to make a statement for this board that is the position of MTAS that we are actually well within our limits to set those conditions, and that it is implied in some of the regulations as we've discussed, and with the spirit of what we were doing. So I think that's important to understand that we do have authority for that. If it needs to be more expressed, we can discuss that later. But so based on what the city has, that's what we know. We need to discuss whether or not this, from an engineering standpoint, meets muster from this replat, and do we expect this easement appurtenant to exist? And the question is if we leave this to timing in the courts, well, it's been there now for quite a while, and we have a responsibility as a board not to allow this to stay in limbo. The city has a right and an obligation to, at this point, act, in my opinion. So I want to get some other opinions. Let's open up discussion, and thank you for allowing me to frame the comments.
Chairman Zients, I'm going to state for the record that I'm going to recuse myself from the following discussion and abstain from voting on this issue due to a conflict of interest.
Thank you very much.
Yep, thanks.
I have a question. I'm looking at the conditions that we set when we first approved this back in November of 2017, and I too was a member of the board. And condition 2 said that the developer may seek a declaratory judgment permitting the use of Lot 19 for the stormwater detention within 1 year of approval of the plat. I thought I understood Ms. Sims to say litigation was not filed until February of this year.
Hey, Song, do you have anything to add to help elucidate her
Because it would indicate to me by that condition that the developer needed to file something by November of 2018 in order to meet that condition.
Although the Planning Commission made that decision in November of 2017, the Planning Commission approves a plat today, and that plat is not recorded in the Register of Deeds office. No action took place, basically. No plat is approved. The act must be perfected before the subdivision act. You have to take that plat, get it signed, and record it in the county. That's why I think Mr. Cantrell showed one of the plats that were approved by the Planning Commission but never recorded. So that plat doesn't exist, although this Planning Commission approved it. So, although that decision was made November 14, 2017, the 1 year really takes effect from when that plat is recorded. That's when it becomes an official legal subdivision plat. And the date, this was signed by the Planning Commission January 18, 2018. Signed by the Planning Commission. So already you have 2 months have passed before it's even been brought in for Planning Commission final signature. And then the date of recordation there, not very visible. Can you see it? Have a copy that as a date. Thank you. It was recorded January 22nd, 2018 at 2:16 p.m. So the 1 year really ran from January 22nd, 2018 to January 22nd, 2019.
So it was not filed within that 1 year period if it wasn't filed until, if Ms. Sims, the date she gave us was February 5th of 2019 as a filing date, so it would have fallen outside of that 1 year period.
Yes, this was not filed within that 1 year time frame.
Okay. And then I'm sure that there is much more to the story than we are being told, because I need to understand better why it is so critical that we release lot number 71 from being reserved for retention at this time instead of holding off until a court judgment can be issued. I mean, if we're just talking about one lot, I must be missing something here. And so can anybody help me better understand that?
That is something that
we can opine about what the benefits of that would be for certain. I mean, there's many benefits. You're a developer, you have a right to develop. You've met significant obstruction in being able to develop what you want to do. If you did keep it as a retention pond and developed it as a retention pond, even though it didn't need to be in a retention pond, you lose your asset and how it would perform in that way. So you have a right as property owner potentially, if you feel very strongly that you have this, you might want to use it, and it has taken quite a while. And how long does that take? So at some point, do you ask somebody, wait a minute, why is the onus on me to prove this? Why shouldn't this onus be someplace else? So I think that's an interesting philosophical question, but the real question that we have to ask as a board, now that we've had time to obtain more information on what this easement looks like and how it functions, is number one, is the engineering appropriate? And number two, does the easement exist? And the city has gone to some lengths to try to understand that, to help move this along, to number one, protect the residents, to make sure they do have an ongoing easement, because anybody downstream from anywhere can then decide, I don't want my detention basin used for this, and I'm going to build a brick wall around it, which seems like chaos to me. And the next thing is that it does protect the right of people who want to develop from experiencing this problem in the future. So I think it's entirely appropriate that it's here, especially after this long period of time. It's not that it's been a short period of time at all.
Okay, then
Hey, Song, did I help with that? Does that make sense?
You did, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, then I have one more question, because I'm just trying to see this from every case. Alan told us that a retention basin must be maintained by the owner if it is not owned by the city. And so in this case, the owner, am I still understanding, of Lot 19 is Gary Phillips. So what I'm understanding is that Orth is asking Gary Phillips to maintain the retention basin that's going to serve their subdivision.
That's his choice.
Right,
Many retention basins are handed over to the city
Right.
or HOAs.
right,
That's how they're handled usually.
okay. Okay, because there has been some suggestion that the retention basin is not functioning properly and perhaps is not being maintained, and so,
In which case, that would be, when the city has a private individual not maintaining their retention basin, what does the city usually do for that?
If that detention basin fails, for example, and water damages property downstream, that property owner is liable for that. The city has some powers, it's code enforcement, basically. These detention basins are supposed to serve a particular purpose. They are supposed to be up to standard. And if they are not performing that function, the city has some code enforcement powers that it can invoke to ensure that the owner of that property fixes that particular detention basin. Just imagine the number of detention basins we have in this city that are controlling water upstream, which if they are not maintained, all that water is going to get into downtown. And then imagine the flood we've been getting in the city, in downtown. So that's what the city has got that power, can invoke that power.
thank you. That's all my questions.
It's fine. I think physics are interesting. Who gets to choose which molecules of water come to your detention basin versus others? Eventually, it all runs downhill, doesn't it? So
Yeah.
it's sort of an interesting thought. Any further questions for staff or discussion on the board? A Song, my understanding is that if this plat is approved as proposed, that there needs to be an edit made on it.
Yes, sir. The subdivision regulations require that when you have a dead-end street, when you have a street stop, there has to be a 5-foot control strip dedicated to the Johnson City Regional Planning Commission. And what that does is basically say, for any development in future that's going to connect to that street, you must come to the Planning Commission to get permission. In that way, the Planning Commission gets to look at what you're proposing, whether it's a driveway or another street or an extension to that street. When this plat was approved and recorded, there is a note, you can see it right there, that's a 5-foot control strip note that was added. This plat as submitted has removed that 5-foot control strip. So for this plat to be in conformity with the subdivision regulations, that 5-foot control strip needs to be added.
They could have a road into another named subdivision. Sorry, I couldn't let that one go. All right, so we're recommending, the staff is recommending maintaining the control strip and making that edit.
So if the Planning Commission were to approve this for recording, it will be staff recommendation that the 5-feet control strip be included in the plat.
Any further discussion or questions for staff or motions?
So is the staff recommending we replat?
They were recommending approval of the replat conditional upon addition of the 5-foot control strip.
I'm having a little bit of hard time with this.
Okay, let's keep working it out.
Well, I get both sides of the argument. And I understand the commission, we have the ability to make this decision. I would feel more comfortable if the court played out and let them make the ruling. I mean, I get it, but
I'll let you finish.
I mean, part of it's just something that you said earlier about protecting citizens and other builders and other homeowners and whatever. I'm not so sure I feel comfortable with making a decision or voting on something.
I would be comfortable, frankly, if the city, in their good faith and efforts, have decided what an easement looks like when
Yes.
it's reserved.
Yes.
To take a stand on that.
Yeah.
And then act on it appropriately. And if that ends up someplace where it needs to be decided with a robe, then that's appropriate. But at least it's being decided and not left in limbo in someplace else. I think we're at a period of time after 2017
Right.
where it hasn't been decided.
Right.
To sit here and say that, you know what, we've done our homework at this point. This isn't like the night of 2017 when I was here, where we sat and said, well, I'm not sure about this easement, but I think we have reasonable gentlemen who can get together and come up with a decision pretty quickly. Clearly, that's failed, and that hasn't happened. And when that fails, it's up for us as a board to go ahead and make a decision based on the information that we have to make our best decision, and then stand behind that and see what happens.
But is
And I
part
think
of the
after this period of
reason it
time, that's why
hasn't
we're here.
been resolved because they failed to meet that 1-year timeframe that we set for?
I'm not sure that's pertinent, in my opinion, as to whether or not they met their time frame or not. The fact is that it failed, and it still lands upon us to make a decision on it.
But our conditions that we placed at that time said that they would try,
Doesn't change the
file
fact
something
that
within that year, so that's.
The question you could
that's where I'm
raise
being
now
torn
is that on the night of the 17th, or the night in 2017, November 14, 2017, is should we have even applied that condition? Because knowing that Lot 19 was there that night, and knowing what we know now, would we have ever even applied that condition? So that is part of what I'm saying, is that is a bit of a moot point at this point. If we knew more about an easement appurtenant at that night, we would have all looked at each other and said, you know what, this is as easy as a control strip. We know that this is an easement appurtenant. We shouldn't make an issue of this, and we can move forward in an orderly fashion. And I think, unfortunately, it's just devolved into chaos, but for our own edification, because now we know a lot more about easements.
Well, that's true.
To Ms.
Yes, sir.
Wild's point, you will recall that Orth and Company, Gooch and Company came in.
Yep. Again, and it's.
Eric Heron.
Thank you. Eric Heron.
Ms. Wild's point, you will recall that Orth and Company or Gooch and Company came in at some point and requested additional time to resolve this dispute. And that was approved by this board, which in my view is without objection or calling to the attention, hey, you're too late to be coming in here asking for that would waive that condition because you approved the secondary request, if that helps you with that issue.
Thank you for bringing that up. I forgot about that.
I was going to make the point also that the pleadings in the courthouse are not irrelevant to this board. And I have looked at those. And there is a motion to dismiss filed by Mr. Phillips and Company for failure to state a claim, stating that the court cannot create easements and they can only interpret existing rights. And so I would, again, urge this court to go ahead and accept that if an error was made, and I'm fully aware that it seemed like a good idea at the time in November 2017, that if an error was made, I do think a public board has got a special obligation to try to evaluate the decision that they made, and if a correction needs to be made to make that. We have provided to you opinions better than I cannot really give you a real estate opinion. That's why we've acquired some for your packet. But you are facing what's known as the Hobson's choice or the Hobson's dilemma. And so, welcome to what occurs on a regular basis with very fine lawyers. And Ms. Sims is one of my favorite and one of a really good lawyers. She did a nice job. But I really would urge this court or this body to embrace your responsibilities and go ahead and make a decision either way, because I think it is your arena.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate that edification about Gouge and company not coming back to the table again or presenting their case and whatever. I forgot that was mentioned earlier. Thank you for that.
February.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Would you mind also, just because there may be some question, that Mr. Herron was not speaking out of turn in terms of the public hearing being closed?
No, he is speaking, he is our city's representative.
Representing the city.
Exactly. So that is not public comment. That is us asking information of our council. And thank you.
I'd like to make a motion, if I could, Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
that we approve the final plat as submitted based upon all the information that we've received here today.
Okay, with the condition of
With the condition of, I can't
the
remember.
easement.
The easement.
5-foot control strip, yeah.
Thank you.
Get the easement word in my mind,
That.
sorry. All right, so we have a stated motion to approve the replat as it is drawn up with the addition of a 5-foot control strip at the end of the stub.
And I will second it based on the recommendation by the city council.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion on the board? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and call the roll.
Commissioner Harrell,
Like, how did I get it from?
You didn't want me to second.
No.
Commissioner Hickson,
Abstain.
Commissioner Lowe,
No.
Commissioner Marshoni,
Yes.
Commissioner Wild,
Yes.
Commissioner Williamson,
Yes.
and Chairman Zając.
Yes.
Okay, the vote is 2, no, 1 abstain, and 1, 2,
Motion
3,
carried.
4. So motion is approved.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for your time. Appreciate you. All right, we'll go on to the next item on the agenda. Does anybody need to take a break for a moment?
Could we take 2 minutes?
Let's take a short recess, and we'll come right back.
Five.
Great.
I will take a break, but I'm coming back. Thanks, Bill.
Video? Great, we're good? Yep. Thank you. We return from a recess, and we will now be considering the last item on our agenda, which will be additions or a text amendment to the West Walnut District proposed zoning.
Chairman, Planning Commissioners, last year the Planning Commission approved the West Walnut District Corridor Redevelopment Plan and recommended that to the City Commission for approval, which the City Commission approved.
Yes, sir.
And in that process, there were a couple of things that the Planning Commission deemed were kind of low-hanging fruits based on the recommendations that the firm, the consulting firm that worked on this plan, had recommended. One of them had to do with sub-districting, work on sub-districting the West Walnut District, access management. That was going to take some more work, some more studies to do, issues like consolidating driveways, minimum lot coverage, ground floor uses, parking, architecture standards, bicycle infrastructures, public arts, bonus provisions, all of that were facade width. So the last week, the Legislative and Policy Advisory Committee of the Planning Commission met.
Yes, sir.
To look at what were some of the low-hanging fruits that we currently have in our zoning code for the West Walnut District that we need to handle as soon as possible, especially as we begin to get development coming into this district. The city is currently working with an engineering firm to design the road, in order to implement this plan. So it's important that the land use elements are going together with that redesign, and that any development that is going on in that district, at least we should be implementing the vision that was in this plan. So those key low-hanging fruits that were identified had to do with the facade width, as indicated here, or what you may also call the build-to zone, and the parking requirements. The regulations in front of you, section 6.34.4.5. So you have the entire article. You have the entire article in your hands. That's article 6.3.4. Anything that is struck out, I begin from 6.34.2.17. It initially read parking lots and garages with first floor. Those are permitted uses. With first floor retail encouraged. Something is just encouraged, it really doesn't have teeth. Staff, you really cannot require it. So the committee working with staff determined that it was necessary to revise that, and actually give it some regulatory power, instead of just leaving it at the discretion of staff or the developer on what they want to do or not do. The other section, which is written in red, and that's an important area, has to do with the facade width or the build-to zone. In front of you is the West Walnut District Plan, and what the facade width or the build-to zone basically controls is how much of your lot in the front has to be covered by the building, has to be visible, covered by the building. The intent of the West Walnut District was to avoid the kind of situations we have with developments like Walmart, where you have this huge parking lot and a small building squeezed in one small area, and create more of, have the form of the corridor was highly emphasized. So that is what section 6.34.4.5 seeks to resolve. And I will leave the details for the members of the committee to, provide information, more details to the Planning Commission on that. What was the discussion? What was the mindset? And then section 6.34.6.
Can you summarize what the decision was in here? We can go have them fill in on the discussion, but what was
fundamentally, we required 75% of the lot, to have the building, or the commission, if you have a side street, 35%. If you have like a corner lot, this will very much apply in cases of corner lot. So your front will be 75%, the side street will be 35%. The developer can also clearly designate outdoor amenity areas. This is not just a lawn or a grass area. No, it has to be purposefully designed. Let's say this is outdoor sitting area, dining, for example. Or this is an outdoor gathering area where you have band, playing, some recreation. It has to be purposefully designed to provide, dining, recreational, outdoor gathering. That will count into that 75%. Let's take this example. Let's say this area were by the side of the building, then that will count into that 75%. It has to be purposeful. For properties that adjoin West Walnut District, this is the map, and here you have West Walnut District. For properties that adjoin West Walnut District, that frontage with the build-to zone will always be on West Walnut District. For properties that adjoin Arch Street and State of Franklin, that frontage, that 75% will be on Arch Street, not on West Walnut District. So that is the mind behind this. And then the regulations add the definitions. What do we refer to as build-to zone? The build-to zone, as you see here, refers to an area running along a property line in which the building facade or the building facade and the designated outdoor amenity space must be built. The outdoor amenity space, as you see here, refers to areas designated and reserved or designated for outdoor recreation, dining, or commercial activities.
Commercial activities, do you mean climbing walls, or what's a commercial activity that?
Things like open sales, like if you wanted to have, booths set up. We considered something like Tupelo Honey, or the former Tupelo Honey's, extended dining area.
But something
you
that's
see
permanently
outside.
purpose-built, not something that you set up like a white tent.
No,
Is it-
because you would have to have a designated
Designated area,
space that
right.
is clearly delineated
Okay.
in some way. Tupelo Honey, it's raised above the level of the street and everything else. And so, but we didn't want to limit it to just a building. We wanted to say that you could have an area where you either had outdoor dining, or maybe you kept permanently open for outdoor sales, by retailers.
Or a large climbing wall.
Or a large climbing wall.
Exactly.
That's what you want.
That's what we need.
That'll work.
All right.
And then the next section was section 6.34.6 that addresses parking. The first subsection there, 6.34.6.1, basically says minimum parking requirements for residential uses shall be 1 space per dwelling unit. The West Walnut District corridor permits residential development on upper floors. You can just go out there and build apartments like we'll have in the
Got a question on
suburban areas. Yes, sir.
that. Is that for a bicycle, a motorcycle, or a car?
I'm sorry, the parking space?
Yeah.
That is for cars.
Doesn't say that.
We certainly can annotate that. I would suspect that shouldn't be an issue.
Are parking spaces in regulations in city usually specified car versus bicycle?
It's
Is it implied
usually
in parking? I mean,
cars,
everything I've ever read,
They also have alternative spaces.
but
Yeah,
you can use
alternative spaces for
bicycle parking spaces to reduce car parking space
Right.
requirements. You can
that
do
would
that.
be called an alternative or something else. I don't think it's not, so parking, it does not imply a full-size car parking space, or?
The parking space being required here is for a car,
Right.
Right.
not for bikes.
But so is there any ambiguity in this text, or no?
I think Dr. Maxioni is pointing out that there is possibility for.
Here comes Mr. Mitchell. He's got to answer.
This doesn't seem ambiguous to me.
No, and while he's pulling that up, we can just clarify that a motorcycle is considered the same in terms of a vehicle as in terms of a
Parking space.
a car or a pickup truck, or that's a motor vehicle. These are parking spaces for motor vehicles, whether that be a Harley Davidson or a Honda or a van or a Suburban. The bicycle parking is actually, it's a provision in our parking ordinance as a the ability to reduce your vehicle parking, but bicycle parking cannot and is not provided on the asphalt portion. It's provided somewhere else on the property. Typically, it's on a concrete section close to one of the doors, but it's not on the asphalt part.
Yeah.
So it is deemed a completely separate type of vehicle and parking area.
I'm not against making things very precise, but on the other hand, if our whole code parking spaces are treated as parking spaces, it might create confusion if you do that. That was my concern. But
Well, the problem with it is the fact that if a person is trying to use a bicycle rack for 3 apartments that are upstairs, then it doesn't have to provide an automobile space.
that is an issue. I mean, I think it's great to have bicycle parking, but why would you allow bicycle parking to supplant a vehicle?
I don't think that's what he was saying. I think he was
Okay.
saying that bicycle parking is separate than motor vehicle parking.
Right,
Yeah,
it is,
yeah,
but
you-
you also said there's some trade-offs someplace too.
You can, per this regulation,
This
if-
doesn't have anything to do with it, right?
yeah, if you build, let's say, you have commercial down floor and 5 residential units on the second floor, you will be required to provide 5 parking spaces for those 5 vehicular parking spaces. If you decide to add bike racks, that is at the discretion of that developer. It will not be a requirement.
It doesn't reduce the number of parking spaces you can have.
It will not reduce the number of parking spaces.
Okay, thank you.
It will not reduce the number of parking spaces. And if you look at the second, the third may clarify this a bit more. 6.34.6.2 says there shall be no minimum parking requirement for public, commercial, and industrial uses. I think the mind of the committee was to allow the market to determine the minimum parking spaces. If a developer comes on the site, wants to build, and determines that I'm only going to need 30 parking spaces, we shouldn't be requiring that developer to create 90 parking spaces, as has often been the case in some other rural or suburban design areas. And then lastly, when parking is provided, maximum allowed parking for all public, commercial, and recreational uses shall be 110% of the required parking specified in section 11.3 of the zoning code for different land uses. That's a section that deals with the parking requirements for each use. So what this is doing is setting the maximum parking spaces that will be allowed for each use. Now, this particular section, we may come back to it sometime in future when this corridor is developed and the city provides public parking. Then we have to look at each of the sub-districts and determine how much public parking is already available. Based on that, we may get down to reducing even this maximum parking space requirement. Part of what we want to do in this district, or that was the intent of the zoning, both the West Walnut District as written in the zoning code and in the plan, is to encourage walking along that corridor.
You really don't want people parking there. You want them going to some new parking garage someplace. That's why a Chick-fil-A who popped in here would have no minimum parking requirement. They could put a bicycle rack out front and no parking and have a Chick-fil-A. And have 1 million people sitting out in the street in their
That's right.
cars.
Is the way this written to mean that either you have 0 parking or 110% of the required parking?
No.
Maximum.
If you provide
The
parking.
maximum allowed, okay,
Yeah,
so not
maximum.
minimum, okay.
Yeah.
But we don't have any city-owned parking property down there yet, right?
No, we don't have. There is going to be on-street parking in the new design, a lot of it, and there were some lots that were identified that could potentially be public parking in future, but right now we don't.
Until we have city reserved parking, you could have everybody build out a whole bunch of Chick-fil-A's down there with no parking, right?
Chick-fil-A in doing that, the developer looks at the market. That's a very important element. If Chick-fil-A determines that, hey, if I go ahead and build this thing without a single parking space, I'm not going to have anybody coming around here to buy
Oh, no,
from
they'll come
Chick-fil-A.
and they'll all be parked in the street. That's my point. We could have businesses all of a sudden popping up And because of the minimum parking environment, they use their lot to its fullest, but we don't have any city-provided parking anywhere around.
No, if
That can't happen?
it can happen. Parking on the street is limited to designated parking spots. So the city has to designate a particular area and say this is for on-street parking. If you just go on the street and just park anywhere, the police will.
I get that, but what I'm saying is then how is anybody, for orderly function of a district, I would imagine that you have to be understanding, people are gonna drive to your district, they don't all just live there. And then they have to park someplace. So if there is no city-owned or privately owned parking garage there, and there is no requirement for a commercial establishment to have parking, what do you just take a bus downtown? I mean, where do you go? Where do you park?
It's like downtown. Strictly speaking.
I would agree with the chairman there. I think you should have some parking somewhere for some people, because, say for instance, you've got a restaurant, you've got no parking, and, you've got, street parking is extremely limited. This is the problem with the old town at the moment. There's no parking. And therefore, until such time that you make parking here, you're never going to have a really big crowds there, because where are they going to park?
We need, for orderly planning, we need to have some way to plan for where people are going to park down here, to have people come, because it's not just going to be a live-in zone. This is going to be a zone where people visit, they're driving to. And if it's a pain in the butt, we're going to kill it before
Yeah,
it
if you don't
starts.
have a parking plan, your restaurants are gonna go away. They won't
come.
They won't come.
I think the intent of the committee was that we wanted to let the market determine that. And there are plenty of available lots, and even in the West Walnut plan that was presented to us, we foresaw spaces that could potentially be developed by private developers as parking garages and things like that. And so that was our intent when we decided upon the no minimum parking requirement.
I
go down
understand
to
that.
Founder's Park all the time, and I've never had trouble finding a place to park.
When we have this kind of a density and development, they're going to have, and I like Asheville with downtown Asheville, kind of parking is a bit of a nightmare if anybody goes down there.
It's a joke.
It's an absolute nightmare. But if you go to the Biltmore planned development where you had a developer do it in a very, cohesive, cogent manner, there's wonderful, easy ways to park. And then people go. It encourages a lively community. So, and I'm not saying that it shouldn't be the private, this is a conundrum, because I'm not saying it shouldn't be the private market, but on the other hand, how do we work with developers to make sure it gets developed in such a way that actually is lively? Or are we just going to, we could have a guy come in and just pop in a bunch of commercial stuff and then, well, okay. Our whole plan for the district just crapped out on parking.
Look, the other thing I just want to raise, like the housing one per housing unit, is all over the world now has changed. They're building some big towns. They're building housing without any parking, because people are changing, which is changing to Uber and all this nonsense.
I think that might happen in Manhattan before it happens in
Yeah,
Johnson
look,
City.
it's going to happen in Manhattan, but the fact of the matter, on the long term, you're going to have less you're going to need less parking. People are already redesigning parking garages in big cities because they know this is going to come. And the fact of the matter is that, I'm for it that you have limited parking for residential units, but on the other hand, I think commercial, you still need parking for commercial.
I think one of the things that might be missing in this conversation is what happens on our end at the Development Services Department when a developer comes in. We don't have a single developer come in and propose a development where they don't seek parking, not one. And so they wouldn't get any leases signed. They would not get one single tenant signed if they didn't have parking. So there has been a shift. What is happening, and this is a modern conundrum and a very good one, our zoning ordinances, when they were originally developed in a Euclidean fashion, meaning everything needed to be separated. You push all the residential over here, you push the industrial over here, you push the commercial over here, and you wrap it in landscaping, and you just hope everybody gets along. Well, we figured out about 20 years ago that that's not sustainable, and we can't develop the rest of our country that way. We need to recognize that the mixing of uses is okay, that not everything needs to be separated, and that by remixing different uses, whether that be institutional or commercial and retail, even light industrial and residential, and then you get into the densities, if you're going to bring all those different land uses back together, now all of a sudden form matters again. Before, when you pushed it all apart, form was less important, and it was all about being able to move and accommodate for the vehicle. Now, I recognize the vehicle's not going anywhere, and it shouldn't. That's our primary mode of transportation. But that doesn't mean that our built environment needs to be designed entirely around the vehicle. And so that's what you're seeing in modern zoning ordinances, is recognizing, number one, that the built environment also recognizes the pedestrian and also recognizes other forms of transportation. And so that's why our streets are now called multimodal. Multimodal streets are streets that recognize and support everyone from the pedestrian to the bicyclist to the moped to the scooter to the bike to the truck to the Suburban to the bus to the 18-wheeler. It has to support all of that. And so that's why we're reintroducing on-street parking, the importance of on-street parking, sharing that amenity. But again, going back to the private development side, the Euclidean zoning ordinances of the past said, if we're going to base everything on separation of uses, where everyone has to drive to these particular uses, then we must put in a minimum number of parking spaces, because the developer's not going to be able to do that on their own. We must legislate that for them. Well, we've discovered over the last now 30-plus years, and give or take, in some of our older zoning ordinances, that the developers did not need that help. They didn't need to be legislated and told how many parking spaces to provide. The market does that for them. You look at your larger big boxes, those retail outlets design for basically 2 days out of the year, because they know that the parking lot's going to fill up 2 days out of the year. Outside of that, your smaller retailers or your institutional uses, like churches and things like that, or your medical facilities, you're going to design a space based on the number of clients that you know that you need and that you can accommodate on a daily basis, plus your employees. You're not going to build a building without that in place. And so what we have found is that when we instead focus on the importance of form and how that building relates to the public space, and less legislation on that the market will decide, and the market will decide what is best in terms of its need for on-site parking. So you're right. This is a struggle, but this is what form-based coding does. This is what moving away from strictly a Euclidean automobile-oriented type of coding does, and recognizing that the market can make some of those decisions.
I think I understand where we're going as a country that way for sure, and certainly in larger cities. But I think we probably should realize that this city is still going to see people coming to it, and that's what we want.
Oh, absolutely.
Primarily in vehicles for a long time.
Absolutely.
That is not going to be a self-sustaining district. And so that's why I bring it up and think, wow, when you think about it, also there was the commission was considering at some point looking at reducing the number of parking spaces by allowing owners or developers to dedicate certain funds or tax structures to building a city-based parking down there, or something like this, where there was being bannered about, to guarantee that there was going to be some parking. So I know that the city commission was concerned about at some point this district having a significant presence to enable people to come down.
And that still has yet to come. Part of implementation of the West Walnut Plan is, number one, we are currently going through the engineering and design phase for design of reconstruction of all the streets, reconstruction of the utilities, and then all of the stormwater improvements. So those are the top three highest priority points in the engineering and design work. Secondary is studying some of those key areas or items that were identified in the plan as important things to do. One being the intersection of Walnut and University because of the crash data and other conflict data that we found at that intersection. And the other is studying the extension through of Cherokee. And then the other is looking at curb cuts, and then the other is looking at parking. So those studies are our responsibility, staff's responsibility to initiate, and those will come. I think that in the meantime, though, allowing the private development community to be able to decide what its parking needs are is a common and is a healthy practice in today's zoning environment.
I don't disagree. My concern was this, hey, that these two things ought to go hand in glove, because they would probably love to be able to form base it so that it is a nice corridor where you walk along and you really don't have to have any parking. They'd love that as long as they knew that there was going to be some parking down the street. So I think and maybe they just decide to build a parking garage, or you have a co-op together and they all build a parking garage. I don't know.
Well, but see, I guess that's part of this too, is please come with me on this kind of mental journey in terms of the pendulum's not going to swing that far to the other side. And I speak from experience on that. It won't swing to the point where all parking's being provided by the government. It won't do that.
Yeah.
The market, I realize the hesitancy behind removing the minimum parking restriction, but the market will not allow that to happen. For example, we are currently reviewing a development project on Walnut Street, has yet to be officially submitted, but based on the minimum parking requirements, it was going to be required to provide around 170 spaces. And they would like to provide 100 spaces. There isn't anything we could do or say to try to talk them down lower than 100 spaces. Nothing. They said, we won't do this project if we don't have 100 spaces. We just won't do it. So the market is demanding that. But the market's not demanding 170. And so there's a savings there. And so that space can be used for better things.
No, I get it. But
Yeah.
from a form standpoint, it might be nice to have these 5 parking spots 2 blocks over in a garage, and then I guess, it'd be nice, you know what I mean? You just don't know
I
because we
think
don't
that
live.
was part of the conversation we spent 2 or 3 hours on.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Preston was there.
So in the end, we decided it was worth the risk to do this, and we hope that
Sure.
that we'll come up with some sort of a stimulus plan that causes people to build a garage.
Garages.
or private individuals will build one. This is this nexus, because trust me, I am not government needs to provide everything. This is a free market society.
We may not find that a vertical or a stack structure is needed, but we'll see.
So
We'll
I'd
see.
like to fire my Parthenian shot and depart. So
Yeah, sorry.
I think we should look at the parking and make decisions accordingly to what we need to get the buildings in there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay?
Done. Got it.
Can
Okay,
I
I'm
would-
sorry to belabor the point. I was just curious how this all worked out and what the plan was. And
I would like to discuss the facade. I was on my way in maybe when you spoke about the facade, I think. It says here facade 75% of primary street frontage lot width. Is that parallel to the road or not?
Yes, and right.
Why? Next question, why?
now I feel bad for belaboring the point. Sorry.
That was what I was saying.
Yeah, but I am properly chastised. Thank you. Any further discussion on it? I'm sorry.
Sorry, you still on the
I think he was
parking?
just, you want
He
to
has a-
repeat
he
that
has-
question one more time?
Sure.
Yeah, the facade, you said 75%. The facade of the building, is it parallel to the street or not?
Yes.
Yes.
Parallel
Must
to
it-
the street.
Must it be parallel to the street?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes.
Why?
Whenever they did, the consultant group who came in with the form-based idea, they wanted to get away from these buildings that were turned sideways where you had large gaps in the pedestrian experience up and down the street. So they wanted the buildings oriented parallel with the street and then for the beautification of it, and also the storefrontage and interesting ideas of how you interact with the corridor. Am I correct? So they wanted the parking to be behind or off to the side, but primary experience of the corridor should be interacting with the storefront and the business, and that's why they did it that way.
I was in the building industry basically my whole life. I must just point out to you, you already said that, first of all, now you must 75% of this building's facade must be parallel to the street. You must have 20% or 50% glass on the second floor, 50% glass on the lower floor. You're not allowed to have outdoor dining beyond the back of the building. You're restricting what you can build tremendously. You're going to end up having factory-type buildings, stuff that looks like a shed with a bit of a facade on it, along the whole corridor. Instead of having individual buildings which looks differently, which you have in all cities in the world, you're trying to make something which is uniform along both sides of the street. On the one side, you're going to only have 2 stories. What is this? This thing is going to look like rubbish, only 2 stories high. On the other side, you might have a chance because it's going to be maybe 3 or 4 stories. But I've got my doubts that you can do something worthwhile with this sort of solution which you've got here. I've been in a lot of countries and a lot of places, and I've never seen anything like this working. Because nowadays you want restaurants, you want to draw people there. You want green space, you want restaurants with seating, and this and that. It means that you must have something interesting.
Right. So, no, I don't want to interrupt. Go ahead, please.
That's fine, that's all.
Let me first begin by confirming or confirming what was answered just a minute ago. Yes, it does. It is applicable to the front property line, and that the building that ratio be found parallel to the right-of-way line. However, I want to point out that we at the committee level discussed, and the recommendation to you as the entire commission is that 75% is not required to be made up entirely of building. That 75% can be made up of outdoor public gathering space. It has to be intentional, and it has to be designed as part of the overall development. And so that the actual vertical elements of the building is not what counts for the 75%. That there are other elements that can be designed as part of the overall development. The reason why that clarification is necessary is because what we don't want is for the lowest common denominator to happen, and that is someone who might have a parking lot to the side and then just claim a section of the parking lot, rope it off, so to speak, and say, there's my amenity, there's my outdoor gathering space. That's not going to cut it, because that's going to kill the intent behind what we're trying to do here. I think that to speak to your comment about the kind of institutional or the uniformity of it having the potential to be somewhat dull, we certainly recognize and want to encourage individual architectural design. That's important. But it's important from a form perspective that the buildings present themselves up at the front of the property onto the public space. And I think you certainly on this board recognize the context and the responsibility between the public realm and the private realm and how those two areas behave. And so what we're trying to do is encourage that the private realm and that space come up to and address the public realm right at its border. That's important. Now, the other is that what you're doing is you are then creating that urban form that has been a very successful type of development all over the world, not just here in the United States, very successful in Europe and elsewhere. And so again, recognizing that urban form, recognizing the importance of the pedestrian, but also still accommodating for the vehicle. So that's the intent behind this ordinance and behind these changes. But I can also promise you that there was a lot of other discussion at that committee meeting, and there's a lot of other changes to this ordinance that are coming forward. what we wanted to do was to be able to bring you some of the lowest fruit, the easier things that we know can be done right now, and move these forward so that we can come back to you with some, I realize this has been a pretty heavy conversation, even thicker content. But yes, excellent comments.
I have one more question on section 6.34.4.2, the exterior building treatment on the lower level, street level. It says 50 to 70% glass, but if you look at that little picture there, and that looks like 90% glass to me. So I don't know, why don't we just say greater than or equal to 50%? If somebody wants an all-glass lower facade, why not let them do it? It invites you into that internal environment. Why would we limit it to 70%? And that's not a 70% picture.
That's about a 90%, yeah.
Can we propose that? I would propose that that part gets changed to greater than or equal to 50%.
A minimum of 50% is
Yeah,
all you need to say.
I would just say
I
greater
disagree with the minimum of 50%. Say, for instance, you've got a practice for a dentist or ear, nose, and throat surgeon. You don't want windows on the street. So why must you have 50% glass? I would say you can start with 20% glass, because then it really gives you the opportunity to make something different with a building than just having this sort of house-like design which you've got here, which is really not what you want. You see, the problem I have with this exercise, I'm sure none of you have spoken to an architect. You must start talking to designers, people who actually design buildings, and hear what they tell you. And this is the way here with this 50. This was based on the house design.
Now,
You have
Commissioner Lowe, please realize
this is before your time. This is before your time.
Right. This is existing language.
But the fact is that from the design point of view, you want something, you want buildings, okay, I understand the facade, there's a point in that, but you want the ability to change your buildings. Some people actually want a building that you can say, I want that purple, ugly looking building, that's where I am, or something like that. Or like the house I designed for myself, it's the ugliest house he's ever seen. But the fact of the matter is that you have to encourage individualism in buildings, even though you have a flat facade. And that's my point. I don't think you should say that it should start at 50%. Maybe it must start at 20 or 30%. I don't know.
I get where you're coming from, Jack, that you want a difference in individuality in buildings, but I think part of the point of form zoning was to create a form that induced uniformity. That was the whole point, that everybody wanted. The vision, the recommendation of the consulting firm and the committee who met on this was that it become more uniform and predictable and that's the point, instead of having gaps and things that didn't look like they necessarily went together. I mean, am I correct in saying that?
Well, I would respectfully alter that statement, not
Good.
because uniformity is not the importance. What is important is high quality design. And it is, unfortunately, in this country right now, it is extremely difficult to obtain and receive high quality design on every single project. You just don't get it on every single project. Now, you get it on a lot of them. You get it on a tremendous amount of projects.
Okay.
I'm sitting here thinking of projects where I came from, but that's not going to do any good. But for example, the performance hall that's under construction right now. I mean, we have a number of other other commercial and institutional projects around town that have been designed very well, but not everything comes in the door that way. So unfortunately, you have to legislate some of these things. What I would ask from a staff perspective to you all is that this is a very good conversation about the fenestration. Can we take the fenestration as well as some of these other things that we talked about at the committee level back to the committee, and we can dive into those things later. One thing I would ask that the commission do is in section, the build to zone 634.45, if you would please, and this is important, on the fourth line down, please change, and I'll start the sentence, clearly designated outdoor amenity space between or at the side of buildings on the same lot may be included in the building facade or build to.
Oh, sure, may.
It's meant to be a may, it's not a shall. Because if in that area, somebody did have the ability and the need to fill the lot with a structure, then they can certainly do that. Right? So shall needs to be may.
Sounds good. Okay. I mean, I think you guys were addressing, we're talking about some things that are already in the code.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, and so really the issue is the red area, and I think I've come to terms with the idea on the parking. That's really the 75% on the front and the parking was the issue here, right?
Sure.
So, does anybody have any other questions for staff or additions, recommendations, or? No?
Mr.
Okay.
Chair, considering the time, I'm going to move that we table the approval of this for the moment and take it back to committee so that we can discuss further some of the discussion we've had tonight and whether or not any of that needs to be implemented.
Well, we certainly wanted to, it's
Or do you want it-
it's
One of
the
the committee, he
purview of the
wants to- he
commission,
wants
but
to approve
these were important elements that we need to move forward on. And that's why we limited our conversation at the committee level to just these. Staff.
This other stuff was well thought out.
Staff
before
is, yes, I mean, I think we know for sure, there's a lot more work to be done. But we would ask your blessing on that with that particular change. And we believe that these changes are consistent with the West Walnut plan as a whole.
Do you want to leave your motion on the floor, or do you want to rescind your motion?
I'll rescind that motion then.
Okay. Do we have any other motions?
Did you make a motion that we?
Well, she rescinded it. We need a motion now to
Oh.
approve or deny it, or do something
I'll
else.
make a motion that we approve the rewritten code as presented tonight,
Okay, with the addition of the may.
with the addition of the may and
Okay.
6 point.
Second.
I have a second from Mr. Marciani, is patiently waiting, chair number 2. Now for the discussion, please call the roll.
Commissioner Harrell?
Yes.
Commissioner Hickson?
Yes.
Commissioner Lowe?
Yes.
Commissioner Marchioni?
Yes.
Commissioner Wild?
Yes.
Commissioner Williamson?
Yes.
Chairman Ziones?
Yes.
Motion approved.
Motion to adjourn?
Second?
Third.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Don't pause, Mike, then you on the way before I get to.